took one of the power valves apart here. I thought I might as well show you how that works. So you got springs that, it's a two-piece, the actual guillotine part of the valve. Springs kind of hold this together like that. So you got your springs in there, which of course will move with the actuator. Oh, I got a bolt holding it up there, that's what I want. So you can pull that out, push the actuator down, pull the springs out, one on each side of course. These pieces just kind of fall off that go on the edges there. Just remember where they go, you want to put them back on the side that they came from. I've just wiped this down and cleaned it up a little bit with brake clean. It looks like some carbon there, but you can't even feel it, that's perfectly smooth. Oops, there goes the spring. The other piece I'm going to be doing a little bit more cleanup. There's a bit of carbon on this, but it's not really bad. Clean the carbon off this part because that's where the exhaust flow goes. So you got to push these down as far as they'll go, and then just turn this counterclockwise and pull it out. If you don't take this piece of the valve out, you can't change the gasket. You can't stretch it over top of these without tearing it. So you got to disassemble the entire thing. Don't disassemble them both at the same time. So you can always reference the other one when you're putting them back together if you can't remember how it went. So there's your actuator. There is some tests you can do. I don't think there was any problem with the power valves on this engine. I'm just going to wipe this down a little bit and maybe put a little bit of oil on it before I put it together. There is a test though that guys do, and they just hook vacuum to one of these. I think that line there is your actuator line, and this is an oiler. Just hook up vacuum, pull like 3 psi, cap it, close the valve, and see if it holds that. Well, like not, negative 3 psi or a few inches of mercury, 3 inches of mercury or whatever that turns out to be, negative pressure. And then just leave it overnight or for a few hours and see if it holds, and that'll tell you that your bellows doesn't have any air leaks in it. Before you go back together, of course, remember to put your new gasket on. So I'll get these cleaned up now. So I cleaned this up. Looks pretty good. You just want to make sure that you don't have any obvious holes or anything in your diaphragm there. I can see that that's holding vacuum there if I plug off the port on the inside. At least it was. There we go. I got to plug them both off. There we go. So I'm fine with that. Like I say, there was no power valve problems. Make sure you got the right gasket and it's oriented right, so your oil hole is uncovered. I'm not going to reinstall it because as you can see, I just used the Dremel on this. I think that my die grinder would have just been too much. These are, I don't know if they're titanium or aluminum, but I didn't want to grind too much away. off the ends. So ground them up, polished them up a little bit with the Dremel. I didn't want to get my air compressor fired up either. It's one of the reasons why I used the Dremel on it, but some of this carbon's a little bit persistent here. I did have some 1500 grit paper here that I scrubbed a little bit of it off with, but I think what I'm going to do is just clean these up inside with hot soapy water. That'll dissolve the carbon. They're not going to corrode, they're not made out of steel. So I'll do that and then reassemble the power valves and put them on, but I probably won't get that done tonight. I'll just clean these tonight. I'm not going to do any more assembly. But things are coming along really good, and I'm happy with where we're at. So what I ended up doing with the power valves is just taking them inside and putting them in warm soapy water, letting them soak just with dish detergent and warm water. It works really, really well to clean carbon off. You can see how clean they got. I wouldn't use anything really abrasive on these. I just scrubbed them a little bit with a Scotch-Brite pad. Not a Scotch-Brite, sorry. One of those ones with the blue soap, can't remember the name of them right now. Anyway, they only go together one way. This one looks like it's almost got like a Teflon coating, so you don't want to use anything too aggressive to clean it. So what you're going to find is just look at how it goes together. It doesn't go that way, it obviously goes this way. And the slope is the same there. So it's pretty basic. The barrel ones on the outside, I didn't bother cleaning them up. There's hardly even any carbon on them. I guess there's a little bit on the bottom here, but really I can just wipe that off. I'm not overly concerned about how much material's on those. So that's how it goes back together. First thing you got to do is screw your main power valve blade in. Oh, what's going on there? It didn't start. Alright, so you got to close the actuator. It's the easiest way to do this. And when it stops turning, it's only finger tight. I mean, these things, none of this stuff's going to turn when it gets into the engine, so you don't have to worry about anything like that happening. So you can just tell by the shape of it where your other piece goes. I'm just going to oil all this before I put it back together. Oh, and guess what I forgot to do? Put the gasket on. So see, might as well show you now. The hole in the gasket isn't big enough to go around the power valve, so I'll just screw that back out and then put the gasket in there. Alright, back together, got the gasket on. Just going to give everything a coat of oil. Doesn't take a ton. This little bit here is going to help hold these two together. That. And compress our actuator. This is a bit tricky getting the spring back in there. Put the springs in. Okay, yep. Bit of a mousetrap to put back together, but it's not too bad. And there we go, back together. This is the your right-hand side power valve. So I'm just going to make sure I got a little bit of oil in the bore here, not a lot, just enough to lubricate it. Put some on the valve itself. Of course, on the barrel parts of the valve, you want to get them lubricated. So just like that. Oops, got these on backwards. So when you look at the profile of how these hook on there, you notice how they go. The power valve slides in like this, of course. Great. Okay, I'll put it back together. Alright, so the second power valve, we've got the main piece, the main blade installed here. It's a good time to make sure you put your gasket on first, of course. Put your screws in, because it's kind of hard to get these screws out past the actuator when it's pressed down. You can probably get them in after, but I just put it in and then kind of holds the gasket there, sort of. A little bit of oil on here is going to hold your bottom piece together. on there. See this, I cleaned these just with soap and water and an SOS pad. They look like they're in really good condition. That flapper wheel is too aggressive. I won't use that again. I didn't realize that these actually have a coating on them. I was able to just scrub it all off though. You can see that they're in really good condition. Not really much for wear at all. There's a little bit of wear you can see right there where it hits the monoblock, but I'm not worried about that. Anyway, and then if you just, I think this is the easiest way to put them back together again. Put your springs on your bottom valve. You almost need 3 hands to do this. Oops, there goes a bolt. Go ahead and compress it all the way. Stick the springs in like that and snap it together. That's a lot easier than the other way when I had to compress the springs and put them in. Then you can just lay your barrels on the side like this. I'm gonna just lubricate all of this. A little bit of oil on here. Plunger's a little bit seized up. There we go, no it's not. But I'm also going to lubricate the bore that they go into. There, plenty of oil on that. And now, I'll just go ahead and drop it in the bore. Sure the gaskets lined up. See, oh yeah, sure, screw came out, but it's hard to get back in. Go. Easiest way to get at these bolts is with a screwdriver. Using the Torx bit, a little bit tight there for tall over clearances. Let's see if I can just push it down, my finger over the vacuum line, and you can see that obviously there's no tear or anything in the boot because I was able to hold that. I know that some guys do it for a lot longer than that, but I don't have time to, and the fittings right now to. Okay, so I mistakenly referred to this piece as earlier as the actuator. I guess this is just a sensor, since the skidoo rave valves are vacuum controlled, still like kind of like a mechanical setup. So this is going to have pieces of plastic there that show you which way it was installed. So you can't mess that up. Well, try hard enough, I guess you could. And what do we got there? 8mm? There it is. Have this back in frame tonight, so that's always good. Guess I don't really need to put that on there. Okay. And now I'm going to put a little bit of Loctite on these. These are definitely not very high torque. And 15mm. So they had that BRP, that white Loctite on them when I took them apart. so torque here on the hold down bolts that hold the valve into the cylinder, 80 inch-pounds on your T30 Torx there, and then on these 15 mil ones up here, 62 inch-pounds. So not super tight. Alright, I'm going to leave the cover off. Just put this aside because apparently it's quite a lot easier. It makes sense that I can hook these lines up, especially the vacuum lines, to actuate the valves without that plastic cover on, so I'm going to leave that. I just ground this. Boysen recommends not modifying the reed block, but I did just sanded down that with a Dremel tool. There's a little bit of a lip there where the rubber coating is to seal the reeds. Be really careful when you're doing that, but maybe you'll gain a little bit of flow, I don't know. That's clear. Alright, so put your reed on the block and see if it's actually sealing, because they will be arced and you can put them on upside down. Yeah, see, that would be upside down. There's actually a little bit of a gap there. So I'm just going to do one at a time. Of course, there's directions that come with the reeds. It's pretty straightforward. The bottom ones have got an extra hole. The replacement reeds have the same thing. So I'm just going to get my reeds done here before I put the engine back in the chassis. I want to get at least sitting in there and some connections hooked up tonight. So they recommend a dab of Loctite. Makes sense. There's lots of movement in the reeds. They're always flapping up and down, 8,000, 8,500 RPM. So I'm going to Loctite them. Loctite's been around for a while, so I hope it's still good. And the screw doesn't want to start. So of course you want to be really careful. These little screws, fine thread, are pretty easy to strip. It wasn't lined up. PITA here. Here's the reed block, what it looks like when it doesn't have the reeds on it, attached to it. So there's just a little bit of a sharp edge right there. I don't know if I'm going to gain any flow by smoothing that out with the grinder, and you got to be careful. You don't want your this plastic, pardon me, this rubber coating to start peeling off. So if you do decide to smooth this out a little bit, just be careful about that. I noticed there's quite a bit of dust and debris and stuff, grime I guess you could say, inside here. You can see quite a bit of it, so you just want to clean that out really good before you put your new reeds back on. Again, you'll know the top reeds and the bottom reeds because of the holes in there, and then make sure you put them with the arc down so that they don't have a gap again. Okay. And also your retainer plate for the reeds, this is the lower, but that lip there goes towards the front, like that way. If you take them both off and you don't remember which way, it seems like because there's a lip here that it would go that way, but it's the opposite of what it seems. It goes on like that. So I'm going to just clean this one up. I've got one already together with the new Boysen reeds there. I'll clean this one up now and polish it a little bit. Put my new reeds on. They say not to over torque the screws for the reeds. The spec is on your instructions here. It says 1 Newton meter. Pretty tough to measure 1 Newton meter. I'm not overly concerned about over torquing them. I'm putting a little bit of Loctite on them, and you can feel it when the screw compresses the reed and it stops turning. You can feel the screw seat. So just, you know, I'm just making them snug. I'm not overly concerned about over tightening reeds. I've changed reeds a lot. I've never actually torqued the screws. Maybe I'm out to lunch. I've never had any problems though. So get this one done now. So a couple things that you might want to check is you can see there's a little bit of a wear surface right there. You can see where the reed's kind of worn into the reed block here. It's not through the rubber coating that's on here though. See, I kind of broke through the rubber coating there. That's probably not the best to smooth that out. I should maybe just have used some emery cloth, but it's tough to sand the rubber down without a power tool like a Dremel. Anyway, so you can see this arc right here. Probably see, hopefully you can see that in the glare. Just checking if you see metal coming through like this, of course, that's not going to make a seal. Your reed isn't going to seal to your reed block very well. So that's something to inspect when you have it apart. I don't know what happened here. This one's got a chip right there. That might be from the factory. I'm not sure. I don't know how that Rubber's pretty resilient material. I don't know how that would be chipped there. But I've seen where this rubber coating is kind of peeling a little bit off, and the guy took a Dremel, it was on a form, and he was able to buff that off. His was a lot worse than mine. These ones just have a little bit of a ridge there. So when the reed's first opening, that could possibly impede a little bit of flow. I'm going to take a little bit more off that middle one. And that would be similar to back cutting valves in a 4-stroke engine to get low lift flow when the valve's opening. I don't know how much I'm going to gain or if I'm going to gain anything, but every little bit that you polish and clean up, technically it should do something. Like maybe you'll get some throttle response, maybe you'll get a little bit more power, it might just be a little more responsive. So I'm going to find that out. With the power valves too, something I didn't mention is apparently these have got to be calibrated by with the BUDS program from a dealership. So I'll probably end up having to take this to a dealership and have it programmed, because guys are saying that if you start riding after you've disassembled everything, it's to do with taking the sensor and the bridge off the power valves. Apparently if you can get this out as an assembly without taking this bridge off, which it's going to be really tough to get these bolts out of here, but I guess that if you can get that one out, this one, and pull it all out as one piece, that you don't have to have it recalibrated and you can clean it and put it back together. I don't know what they're going to charge me to recalibrate it. I'm not overly concerned about that. I'm going to run it a little bit first and see if that's actually true, so that's something that we'll find out when I put it back together. I'm sure it is true. I mean, the guys on the forums know what they're talking about. You got some dealership mechanics on there and stuff, which is kind of a bummer, because I was hoping to have this thing back together, fire it up, and go for a nice long road ride and break it in. If I do have to get these recalibrated by the dealership, I probably will get them to put it into break-in mode while they're at it, so it runs a little bit rich. Anyway, cross that bridge when I get to it. So I got my new reeds back in. Boysen reeds are on them there. So you'll see that the bottom screws, there's a little divot. The reason why that divot's there in the reeds as well is because the reeds are actually different thicknesses. But see how the screws are staggered in the middle there, so the reed block goes together. Alright, so when I first took them out, it kind of tripped me out just for a second, because it feels like you're breaking them when you do this. But they're just stuck together that's just the rubber bonding there. Got one keeper off already, one hold down. A bit crispy. You can see I don't know if that's belt dust or what, some stuff in there. So anyways, I thought it was, like, going back together, it's pretty obvious. They only go in one way. You'll know because you'll see these ones have the hole in there for the opposing reed screw head to fit into. So you can't really put it together backwards. You can see that these reeds are a little dirty. If you're taking them apart and just cleaning them and putting them back in, you just want to inspect them for chips, of course, and then wear on this surface. And then before you put them back in, just make sure that they're sealed, that there's not a gap in the middle, like, it's not sticking out like that, and there's not a gap. That's, of course, very exaggerated. So those are a couple things if you're going to reuse the reeds. Figured that these ones have got enough miles on them that they're ready for a replacement. So I'm just going to do the same thing with these ones and stick them back in. And here's the other side reeds done. Just go together like that, pop them in. That's done. I like to put them in. That's going to just give me one more line of defense to keep anything from getting into the engine. It's kind of sealing them. Oh, actually, one thing that I was going to do, I saw a guy on the forum saying that he just put a little bit, he soaked his reeds in 2-stroke oil overnight. I'm not too sure exactly what the benefit of that is, but I do think that if you get a little bit of oil inside the reeds like this, then it's going to help to make sure that they don't stick if you're not going to run your engine for a little while. So I'll just do that. Just make sure there's a little bit in each side so that the rubber doesn't stick to the reeds. So I was going to try and put this in tonight. I don't think I'm going to get the engine actually in the chassis tonight, because I just remembered that I have this undercarriage brace here. Directions for it. So this is the brace. I got this off eBay. So I'm going to put that in. It does say that you have to take it apart a little bit. Take some things off the engine off the sled to get it in. You got to move the muffler and pipe tip sled on its side, use something to protect, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so I'm going to work on this, going to get this in, and then I'll drop the engine into the chassis.